to a point, and I think the church is fast getting there, that we understand that the Book of Mormon is a 19th century text, and it's not likely to have any ancient or historical connection to the indigenous people of the Americas. And so part of the book, you can, like I said, you can use it as a commentary. You can go through and look at the topics, and they are 19th century topics that Joseph is talking about in a 19th century environment to a 19th century audience. And these are the kind of things that Dan McClellan's identifying, and he hasn't talked about them in depth, but hopefully, this book gives a good understanding of that and a way to work through that understanding with a lot of grace, but also, textual evidence.
Welcome to She Became Visible. That was a little snippet of my guest today. I am so excited to have Ganesh Cherian on my show. We are doing Mormon Monday, so we're going to be talking about all things Mormonism. And Ganesh has just come out with a book that he has been working on for at least 2 years. I'm sure it's been longer than that, and I will let him explain that. But his book, let me show you a picture of it. Joseph Smith, The Architect of Mormonism, a topical biography. And I want to read to you the description that is on Amazon. You can get the book on Amazon, but I'm also going to tell you a little bit about getting the book in a little bit farther into the podcast. But this is the book review that Amazon says. The modern Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints claims the Book of Mormon and the church institution are inseparable. History proves they're in tension. This groundbreaking biography uncovers the stark divide between the text Joseph Smith produced in 1829 and the religion that exploded and imploded by 1844. Meticulous research reveals how Smith's early idealism collided with the chaos of building a radical new faith, leading to innovation, schisms, and ultimately his martyrdom. And I will let you finish reading that on your own, but it is a perfect description. And I met Ganesh through his posts on TikTok. When he was researching and doing the gathering of information that he needed to do for the book, he would post information on TikTok. It was absolutely fascinating. So let me stop talking. I'm going to bring Ganesh on. Let me get rid of this so that I don't accidentally click on it. I do that sometimes. Let me bring Ganesh on so that we do not have to just listen to me. I'm just taking these off because sometimes I have a habit of clicking things twice. And just to let you know, my editor is out of the country right now. So I don't think he'll be back in time to edit this. So I'm going to do the best I can to clump everything together and not make it too awkward. But regardless, let me bring on. Hello, Ganesh.
Renee, it's lovely to be with you. And what a fantastic introduction. This was gorgeous.
Well, thank you. And I feel like, I think we got the silvers going on here. We've got the bookends for the silver souls here. So, it's my job, Ganesh, to not make you feel, awkward with your silvers, your silver fox time of season.
Well, I'm glad to be in an interview with somebody with such gorgeous hair, and to share the white, because I'm very white, and fortunately with a little bit softer lighting today, it looks a bit darker. But the other day when I was on Mormon Stories with John Dillon, the light, the way that he's got the lighting just made my hair look like it was glowing white, which was fine, but it's just not really how I think I look.
No, it was great. And I have to tell you, I'm just gonna like tease you a little bit. I have to show you this. This is the story of Ganesh. This is his transformation. And I love this because here's the thing, Ganesh, because I have people that will come up to me and they'll say, "Oh, I would go gray if my silver could look like you." And I'm like, I had no idea what my gray hair would look like, because my dad and my brother looked like you right here in this picture. This is how dark their hair was. And
Right.
so when you have dark hair like that and you go gray, you get this beautiful salt and pepper transition. And I feel as though you get that more of a silver and not, and so I was blonde my whole life. And
Right.
my mom, at 93 is still dyeing her hair blonde. So I had no idea what my gray hair would look like. So it's just kind of like, I don't know. I'm just sick of dyeing it. So I'm just gonna let it go and it is what it is. So anyway, but I thought that was fun that John, kind of had to mention your silver hair and then he had to brag about how his hair isn't gray. And I'm like, I'm sorry, because I think you'd look great with the little salt and pepper, John. But anyway, but yeah, so today, though, we are going to talk about your new book. Let me put that back up again. Joseph Smith, The Architect of Mormonism, a topical biography. And so I want you to introduce the book, and I want you to explain to the audience how you went about it as and I don't know if the word believing Mormon is correct, but it with the understanding that that being human on earth is very complicated. And you look at this research and investigation that you did as more of an understanding of the story and the landscape that you're living in. So I want you to explain that to the audience and then tell everybody. And the other thing I like about your book is explain how the way your book is set up is you could flip through the book and find a chapter and you could take each chapter individually. It isn't like a novel where you have to start with A and then there's an arc and the whole bit. And so talk about that, the way it's laid out, and then your journey into the truthfulness that you feel, but also your continuing involvement in the community. So talk about that.
Right. Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Well, first off, I guess the book is a topical biography, and what that means is that I track a number of topics through Joseph Smith's life, from his environment, his family dynamic, his own personal circumstance, what is written in the Book of Mormon, what becomes the first iterations of the church, including his revelations. Then there's usually some catastrophe, some challenge, which requires him to change, to pivot. And then what we get is what happens to him in Nauvoo before he's killed in 1844. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. And in terms of looking at the book, you can popcorn it. It's like a choose your own adventure. You could decide, oh, I want to know about this, and follow a particular topic, a particular idea, and then maybe even a whole theme, and then track that through Joseph's life so you can get a good understanding of it. One of the things that happened to me when I learned that church history was a lot more complicated than I had been led to believe was that the information just soon became really overwhelming. And I kept finding new things, which were both exciting, but also quite harrowing, particularly when the subject matter was really tough. And so I needed to have a framework to uh, make sense of the chaos. And so a few years ago, when I came across a number of things that were really tough, particularly when I came to live in the States, one of the things that challenged me were things like violence and racism, which I hadn't really experienced as much with regard to the church in terms living in New Zealand. And these things were quite confronting to me, and I had to make sense of why the church had such a violent past and why it had such a racist past, because in New Zealand it's not quite that way. Mm-hmm. And those are things that I just delved into the history and understood, oh, these are foundational elements of early American formation. This is how the economy started. This is how the United States broke away from Britain. This is how people moved across the continent and subjugated the indigenous people. This is baked into what is going on as America becomes a force in the world. And those things were really tough for me to swallow, but they were also really important things to understand. And then later, when the church started to release their gospel topics essays, things like polygamy, which I thought I understood or at least had glossed over enough that I'd made peace with them. When I started to delve a little deeper, I realized, oh gosh, this is a lot more complicated than I imagined. And so I actually ended up doing a blog where I spent 6 months and I went through the history of the church, what happened in Utah, what happened through to the present day, and documented a lot of things along a timeline. And that helped me to understand why polygamy is basically condemned in the Book of Mormon, but then became the defining nature of the church by the time that Brigham Young is in Utah. And so when a few years ago I came across some things, particularly Dan McClellan's work on biblical criticism, and he didn't talk much about his LDS background, but when he did, and he talked about the Book of Mormon, because people were asking him and pushing back on his biblical criticism with regard to the Book of Mormon, he explained the Book of Mormon as a 19th century text, and the best way to understand it would be to look at it from that lens point, and that was the beginning kind of snippet that you gave at the beginning of this interview. And another person that was really influential to me at that particular time was a guy called William Davis, who wrote a book called Visions in a Seer Stone, and he talked about the Book of Mormon as a performance work, as a play, that Joseph is dictating it, but he's doing it just like you might do a podcast, right? You've got an outline of what you might want to cover in today's interview, but what actually happens depends a lot on the interaction that you have with the person that is there, what they're talking about, the kinds of tangents you might go on, and you might have an outline so you come back to particular points, but there's something dynamic about the podcast world, the interview world, and that's the same kind of way that Joseph produced the Book of Mormon. He has an outline, but he's performing it. He's dictating it to a scribe, who's the immediate audience, and the household, who are either around and listening, or they will read the transcript after it's done. So he's responding to their queries, their questions, maybe Oliver Cowdery, as Joseph is dictating, looks confused, and so then Joseph does a bit of a tangent and pivots, and then talks and explains it again and again and again. So this is a dynamic work. The Book of Mormon is not a history text. It's not something that somebody wrote down and then it's now being recited. It's like a comedy sketch. It's being influenced by what is happening in the moment with the particularly the audience that Joseph has. And so those kinds of little dynamics I wanted to bring to in great measure in my book when I'm trying to explain what is going on and how did it happen. Well, there's three things. One is it's 19th century, so what's happening around Joseph at the time. Then there's the performance aspect of the Book of Mormon, but also the performance aspect of Joseph's life, because he's not just doing this with the Book of Mormon, he's doing this with his revelations, he's doing this in councils. The way that the church rolls forward is not, Joseph is always in the driver's seat. He's absolutely always in the driver's seat. He always wants to be there. But the person who's riding shotgun changes. The people who are in the back of the car changes. They change. So effectively, it's a collaborative effect where he's directing what's going on, but the people that are around him have a significant influence in how this is shaped and how it rolls forward. And so those two kind of pathways, I guess, are basically how I'm looking at Joseph's life and the way that Mormonism rolls forward in his life are determined by those two things: his environment, his 19th century environment, and his crew, who he's got around him, how they are
Interesting.
influencing what is actually happening and what ends up being adopted or being discarded, right?
Yeah.
So those so the book is really just a mechanism to be able to understand that. And so I take the reader through, an idea. It could be a theological idea, it could be a government idea, it could be a prejudice idea, something of Joseph's, and track it through his life, the people that are around him, the influences that are changing what's going on, and then what you end up, particularly by Nauvoo when he dies. So
Yeah.
they hopefully they're like little mini stories, and you can just, like I said earlier, popcorn and pick your own adventure and feel like you are getting a good summation. So you can even test it with things that you might feel really comfortable about, and check the information, and then you might go, oh gosh, I haven't even thought about these particular ideas.
Yeah.
Maybe I can have a look at them and get some clarity.
That's, and I love when I first heard you explain it like that, it was like my brain cleared a little bit because as you said, when you start hearing historical contradictions to what we were told growing up or what we were told over the pulpit, you start going, wait, what? And then you get this idea of this huge, Russian overtaking and hiding and it's like, but no, it's not, it's more exactly how you explained it. It's every story every movie, like for example, people go see Star Wars and they like, oh, I love Star Wars and this is my favorite character and this is when Leia does this and this is what that meant, and but nobody looks at the underlying story behind Star Wars and what was going on in the world at that time when that story was written. And it's just a play, as you said, of taking some things that were going on in the world and turning them into fictional characters and then retelling it in a fun way. And so when you explained that, it was like, yeah, every book, every movie, everything that we hear and watch and read, the author is talking about something that's going on in their world at that time, and then they're turning it into a fictional, fun storyline, and people don't see that. And I know the new Superman movie just came out, and my husband and I went to see it. And, you know, we're both very like, if you don't grab us in the first 10, 15 minutes, we're out of here. And so to me, it was a very boring introduction. And I think I'm spoiled because I'm old enough to have watched all of the old Supermans. But so we got up and left, and I was like, this is boring. This dialogue is really stupid. It seems very high schooly, blah, blah, blah. But then I started hearing the reviews and how people were like, it's woke and they're trying to tell you things, and I was like, it was, maybe I should go back and watch it. But everything is a story of what's going on in the world. And so here's the problem though, Ganesh. I'm going to play a little clip from one of the general authorities, and it's interesting right now. And I love that you primarily live in New Zealand, and I love that you explained how you didn't necessarily feel the racism because you live in a brown community and you live with people, and that's the bubble that people in Salt Lake don't get. Like for example, something as simple as the Boy Scout program. You live in Salt Lake, your ward is basically your neighborhood, the kids you go to school with, and you could walk to church because there's a church every 3 feet. And so, having a Boy Scout group is great. You've got 20 scouts and you've got this and you've got that, you've got financial support. Well, in Ohio, it's not like that. Your ward boundaries are huge, and people have to drive to come to a meeting, and you don't have the support. And so, people from outside of Utah would say, can we get together with other wards and combine our Boy Scout
Mm.
troop? And people in Utah would go, what? No, you can't do that. What are you talking about? And so that's true in so many areas of this white blonde bubble in Utah, that they don't understand how the church works. And I see that in the struggles that's going on as they try to branch out, as they're trying to turn, Africa is their new missionary movement. And so now they're kind of going, oh, crud. Okay, we got to change some of our doctrine because, this isn't working outside of Utah. What do we need to change? And people like me are like, you don't change anything. What are you doing? And anyway, so but to me, the way you explain the Book of Mormon as a story of contextual, American history was like, oh, I get it now. It makes sense. And exactly what you said. I mean, when you listen to Lucy talk about how he would gather the family and he would tell these stories, and he continued doing that, it was the same thing. I love that. Okay, so let me show you this little bit with Tad, and then we'll go from there.
Book of Mormon, man-made or God-given? Because the Book of Mormon is the keystone of our religion as described by Joseph Smith, the church rises or falls on the truth of it. As a result, if the Book of Mormon can be proved to be man-made, then the church is man-made. On the other hand, if its origin is God-given, then Joseph Smith was a prophet. And if he was a prophet, then the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is true. It is that simple. Once we have a foundational testimony of the Book of Mormon, then any question or challenge we confront in life, however difficult it may seem, can be approached with faith, not doubt. Why?
Okay, so that is a perfect example of the common teachings in the church. So how do you wrestle with that, and what kind of pushback are you getting when you're saying, you're not saying, and I haven't read your book, is going to be delivered today from Amazon, so I can't wait to get it in my hands. But how do you wrestle? And when you go to all of the events, you've been to so many events, and you have people come up to you and say this, or you watch conference, because you do attend church still, and you listen to people talk about, Nephi and, Amalekhi and the King Lamoni and all these characters as if it's their neighbor, as if these are historical George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and they truly do believe these people are historical people. How do you deal with that?
It's a very good question. But firstly, I grew up in the 80s and 90s where that very strong binary made me feel very special, right? We have the truth, right? It's either true or it's not true, and of course it's true because it feels so good. But also, there's this understanding that we have it right, so therefore we are superior, we are correct, and you can count on it, you can rely on it, and you can follow it through because it is true. And that's exactly what Ted Callister is saying here. And and as I listen to him, there's a part of me that is proud of that idea. That was, Gordon B. Hinckley, as a media person, managed to put Mormons on the world stage in such a great light. And we were so proud of him going on places like Larry King Live, and we watched that in New Zealand. These were ways that our church just shone as being, we could stand up and hold our head proud that we had the truth, and it couldn't be challenged. So I have huge empathy for that way of thinking, and it still gets me, because I think as humans we like to have clear ideas. We'd rather have a clear idea than think it's messy or complicated, because it's either right or it's wrong, or it's good or it's bad, or it's or it's left or it's right. Those things feel very safe to us as people. It makes us feel confident that we can make choices and follow through with resolve on them. And yet, at the same time, we live in a world that's very messy. I guess the other thing, the way that you can kind of contrast that is you could say that you couldn't apply those things to your family. You couldn't go, my family is true, and therefore other families are untrue, or my
I love that.
my family. You might be able to
Love
say my
that.
family is good, but there is probably some not great things, or there's probably some, so so there's parts of our psyche that we understand that it's complicated, and we have mechanisms to deal with that, ways that we explain or get rid of our binaries when we need to, because we often need to. I'll go back to your Star Wars kind of premise. We all know that Star Wars is not true, right? It isn't true, but absolutely, like you said, George Lucas made this in a particular time with particular political backdrop, and so the ideas in Star Wars are true. The characters in Star Wars are real characters, real understandings of people. Like, I still think Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia are real people. Like I know that they're fake. I know that they're a fiction. I know that they're just a metaphor for, that particular, part of life. But those kinds of things that they were grappling with, what's our family heritage? What if our dad is a villain rather than a hero? What happens when we grow up with a story, and then we find that story is much more complicated as we get older? These are real truths. These are the ways that people are dynamic. And the one cool thing about Star Wars, of course, is that it's set on another planet in another galaxy, far, far away, right? But
like Kolob,
like Kolob. but when you get to imagine that world and that dynamic, you don't have to attach your own prejudices to it, because it's a totally different world, which means you get to explore an idea or things that are going on without it having to affect you, right? Let's say Star Wars was about this evil empire, the idea that it was taking over. Now, lots of people might feel that way about the world today, and how there are sinister things going on behind the scenes that is taking governments and politics in really dark places, and there's a rebel alliance who is fighting against the baddies. Now, everybody thinks they're on the hero side, right? And everybody thinks that their enemy's on the villain side, so that's slightly problematic. But those things feel true. They ring well to us. And then let's say, because it's happening in a galaxy far, far away, you might be able to explore somebody else's point of view without feeling like it attacks your identity. And that's why sci-fi is so persuasive. But it's not only sci-fi. You think of all the worlds that we engage in, that we get to play with different ideas. Superman, that you talked about earlier, he was a great hero of mine. That's all I wanted to do as a kid, was to fly around the place and help people. That was, just, and I could imagine doing that, because I could watch Superman and feel like, I could in one instant be Clark Kent, very
nerd journalist,
nerdy, but in the next instant I could be, I could transform myself. I could be brash and bold and rush to the scene and help somebody, and then anonymously slip into the background, right? That was such a dream. Now, I know that people don't fly, but I feel like I've had lots of Superman experiences throughout my life. So, and I may not have come from a place called Krypton, but I came from a home or a space that was really weird or didn't fit into my current environment, and so I had to, maybe disguise myself a little bit. But I had some superpowers because I was from this other place that other people didn't know about. Like the reason why these stories work is because they build a world where you can explore. You think of all the kids who are playing Minecraft. You think of all of the people that we know that play Dungeons and Dragons. These are role-playing things where you get teams of people and you create worlds together and you explore ideas. And this is incredibly human, but it's incredibly insightful and imaginative and building and caring and community. And now, so going back to your original question, do those things have to be real? Well, the feelings have to be real. Maybe even some of the dynamics have to be real. And the characters may be based on real events and real ideas and things that people think, but they don't necessarily have to be historical or ancient in order to have a huge impact on our ways that we care and connect with other people. There are more people in the world who believe in Middle Earth and Tolkien's works than there are that believe in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
That's
or Moroni,
true. That's true.
Or Nephi, or there. So I mean, I think that most people who engage in Middle Earth and the Tolkien series know that it's a fiction, but I have met people who act like it is real. And Tolkien, he slightly a bit prejudiced, right? Because you can see that when he's talking about the hobbits, he's talking about English people, and when he's talking about the orcs, he's talking about maybe Turkish people. So, and when he's talking about the elves, he's talking about the Netherlands, and when he's talking about the dwarfs, he's talking about the Germans. Like there's and the whole scene of the Lord of the Rings is really a commentary on World War I, because that's what Tolkien was trying to relieve the angst of the world circumstances through his books. And they're still applicable some 50, 60 years later, or more, 80 years later. So the ideas, does something have to be ancient and historical in order to be impactful? No. So when I go to church and people are talking about Nephi and the experience, I don't cringe, because I know that Nephi is a character that Joseph Smith has infused his own beliefs. Nephi is Joseph, right? In fact, the crazy thing about the Book of Mormon is that all of the great heroes of the Book of Mormon are Joseph. It's Nephi, it's Alma, it's Moroni, it's Mormon. Like Joseph writes himself.
If Joseph Smith had access to AI, he would have memes out right now of him standing with the title of Liberty and muscles and every hero story in the Book of Mormon would have Joseph Smith's face on the meme. You're absolutely right. Talk about, okay, so let's get into the book and give an example of, because you explain it so beautifully, of the fact that he was one generation away from the Revolutionary War, that the whole government of the United States was brand new and people were still learning how it worked and how it affected his family. And so give everybody like chapter 1 or wherever you want to start from your book, and explain what was going on in the world. Like you said, how Joseph Smith makes himself the hero, what was going on in his family coincides with the story in the Book of Mormon.
All right. Yes. Okay. Well, a couple of things. And one of the big things I think is that people don't really know how poor Joseph was. Like his family were destitute. They were in Western New York because they were effectively economic refugees. They had fled New England. They were already poor there, but there was a volcanic eruption in Indonesia that coated the world with ash, meant that New England didn't have a summer, crops failed, people were destitute, and thousands of New England refugees flooded into Western New York. So this is Joseph and his family, but it's also his neighbors. But Joseph's family had come from wealth. Both Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Mack's families were farmers. They had plenty. When Lucy Mack and Joseph Smith Sr. got married, Lucy's family gave them a whole inheritance of $1,000, which is like giving 50 grand for a wedding, just to set them up as a family and, allow them to, start and buy a house and have property. And Joseph Smith Sr.'s ginseng speculation fell over, and they had to use that money to clear their debts. And that took them from being really wealthy to being in poverty. And so from that point on, Joseph's family were the poor cousins. And lots of people have this experience, right? Where in a large family, and there's that part of the family who are just not doing well, and no matter what you do or how you try and help them or what you might do to support them, they just can't make ends meet. They're always needing more. They have way too many children. Of course, they're not limiting their family despite the fact that they've got no means, and so their situation just gets worse. And they are the poor cousins. Joseph and his family are the poor cousins, but they've come from something great. So Joseph has these stories, and we see them in Lucy Mack Smith's history, of these grand ideas. They're sixth-generation New Englanders. Lucy's father fought in the Revolutionary War. He fought in the Indian-French War. Hazel Smith, Joseph's paternal grandfather, he fought in the Revolutionary War. These guys were heroes, and yet, Joseph and his family were, not. So Joseph had all of these ideas of grandeur because his family had come from plenty, but he was living in this situation where he was dirt poor. They were laborers, basically day laborers, which meant that Joseph and his brothers, they had to take whatever jobs they could get for whatever money, and sometimes that was a lot. They would work really hard and get next to nothing. Some days would be better than other days. That would be really, whether you would eat or, whether you'd have decent clothing. Certainly if you could go to school, that was a big deal. Only one of the Smith children got to go to anything significant, and that was Hiram went to the Moores Indian Charity School. So it was a charity school for Native Americans who had nothing, and he was able to, to go to that.
So that explains why, because I wondered that. It's like, well, they're very poor, but he's at Dartmouth. So, who's paying tuition? I don't even know how that worked back, in the 19th century, but it was a charity school.
It's a charity school for Native kids. For Native kids, it's not even for it's not even for the
colonizers.
It's next to Dartmouth, and Dartmouth, and there's a connection there, and I'm sure because Hiram, Joseph's parents, Lucy Mack and Joseph Smith Sr. were both highly educated. Joseph Smith Sr.
That was another thing I want you to bring out, because the myth that they were just poor farm people, just, illiterate, it's like exactly what you said. It's like these people came from money and they came from education. And I know that when that is passed down, my friends who pursued higher education, their parents had higher education. My parents were middle-class industrial workers. Neither one of them had any kind of higher education. They barely got through high school. And so that was not anything that was encouraged in my home. But, and I love that you point out, like, did you cover in your book where Lucy was trying to be accepted socially into the little woman's thing,
Yeah.
and she wasn't. And she came from money and prosperity, and she's like, I am somebody, you know. So, I love that you bring that
Yeah.
out. So continue on. I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
interrupted you, but yeah.
So this is the backdrop, and of course Alvin, who was so the problem with this was that Lucy Mack, and seeing as we're talking on the she became visible thing, I think there's a huge, if I want to talk about the kind of the patriarchal kind of nature of their family, the dynamics, what was going on was that effectively Lucy Mack became the breadwinner of the family. She was
Yes.
the person who did the textiles. She made oilskin coverings. She kept the family afloat, basically, and the boys, along with Joseph Smith Sr., were clearing some land so that they could have some property. Now, one of the problems with this was that Joseph Smith Sr., he had a big fall from grace and he never really recovered, which meant that, and in early 19th century America, alcohol was readily available, cheap and sanitary. And, basically, Joseph Smith Sr. had a drinking problem.
Yeah.
So effectively, Lucy Mack was the breadwinner of the home. The boys were sent out to day labor to supplement and get them further ahead. Alvin really was as the oldest son, the person who was really in charge. And because it's early 19th century America, and women were not, particularly if there was a man in the house, they weren't deemed to be the people in charge. Because Joseph Smith Sr. was not able and not participating as a leader, Alvin was that leader. So when Alvin unexpectedly died, this threw the family into huge economic and emotional, turmoil. And Joseph Smith Sr. tried to take over because he's the older person. Things fell over. They lost their family farm. Hiram, who's the next oldest brother, he's a lovely guy, really reliable, incredibly nice, but he's just not a leader. He is Sam in the Book of Mormon, right? He is Limhi in the Book of Mormon.
Interesting.
And so then it fell to Joseph, who's really young at this point when the family lose their family farm. Joseph is, just knocking on 20, and he's just not. He wants to be in charge. He's Nephi, right? He wants to be the person who saves the family, but he's just that little bit younger, and he's got these older conflicts around, and he's got Hiram. Hiram's reliable, but just not a leader, right? So these are the dynamics that are a part of the Smith family, but they're also how Joseph crafts the Book of Mormon. So Lehi is Joseph Smith Sr. He's a visionary. He's got all these ideas. Lucy Mack is Sariah. She's like, I don't know if I can rely on this man to lead our family. There are the brothers, and Sam is, well, the older brothers that. Now I think these older brothers are fashioned after other people in the community, not necessarily the Smith family brothers, because Alvin was incredible, but effectively, Sam is Hiram. He's the benign older brother, and Nephi is the go-getter, but he's young and impulsive and and full of himself a little bit. So that's kind of how things.
And then it is the younger brother. Who's the defiant rebel? William.
William.
So
he doesn't really feature in the Book of Mormon very much because he's way too young at this particular point. But Samuel Harrison Smith, he is Jacob. He, so when you look at the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, what you see is that Samuel Smith Joseph's younger brother, was a really big help to Joseph.
Ah,
Hiram, not so much so, not till really the publication of the Book of Mormon and further forward. So when we're talking about, the younger brother who's a great missionary, we're talking about Samuel
yes,
Smith, and
yes.
he turns up in the Book of Mormon as Jacob. So that's,
Ah, interesting.
but there's Jacob and Joseph, right, in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
Joseph, I think, is William, but William's just too young at this point to actually make
Yeah.
a difference to the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting? Because Emma kind of started playing the Lucy role where she's
Yes,
financially keeping the family afloat
yeah,
through her, managing the mansion and the hotel and making quilts and all of the other things. So it's the exact same scenario is being passed on where, he's not an alcohol. Well, I don't think he was an alcoholic, but, he had his issues, a
he's
little
he's
philandering, a
he's
little
a dreamer,
alcohol.
and he
Yes.
he's spending a lot of time away from home. He's not actually contributing to the economic viability of the household. Um,
Yeah.
he's on the pie in the sky projects, right? Whereas Emma, and this goes right back to the beginning. Emma has cows. She's running a dairy business out of their little house in Harmony, while Joseph is busy uh, scribing the Book of Mormon and dictating it to his scribes. She's doing all the work around the place.
Yeah.
Joseph married his mother.
Yeah.
And Emma is really smart. She's incredibly capable,
Same
and
thing,
she's,
came from money, came
yeah.
from prestige and respect, and yeah.
But those same dynamics play out. If we're talking about patriarchy, I think I have a chapter on that in the book, and I love it because I think one of the things that you see, um, you know, Joseph has a capable mother, and then he marries a capable wife,
Yes,
right?
yes.
However, he does not give them very much credit in the
No,
schema of things.
no.
And you see that in the dynamic of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah,
The women are there; they seem to be the bedrock, but they actually they do not feature in many of the stories at all.
yeah,
There are nameless men all over the place.
yeah,
There are just so few women participating as active participants in the storyline,
yeah,
um, because that Joseph's feeling about women is almost like, they can be seen but not heard.
yeah, well,
That
yeah,
he treats them like that, and that is really the whole of the history of his life.
yeah,
Because Emma, Lucy Mack's a formidable woman, and so is Emma, and they make their feelings known, and they enact things. But it's not because Joseph gives them any
no,
prominence. He
no,
doesn't really consult them that much. He often sidelines them. He believes they're capable, so he kind of feels confident that he can kind of leave and do his own adventures and things like that, um, which at some level I suppose is validating for them. But really, he sidelines them from any forms of leadership or any mechanisms to contribute in a spiritual way to what's going on.
right.
So it's really interesting that that's the case, and that plays out throughout the beginnings of the church, right? The priesthood doesn't go to the women, right?
Right,
And the school of the prophets is not for the women. The
right.
Hebrew school is not for the women.
They're meeting,
The
yeah.
Masonic lodge is not for the women. The missionary going out on missions is not for the women. There, there's the women are invisible for
Yeah.
the vast majority.
And that's so I love that you point that out because it still carries on today, especially in the church, because and it's just human nature. It's not a good versus bad. It's like and when my husband and I were first going through our early marriage things, his mother, his mother and father were married 18 years old. She never worked outside of the home. She did nothing but take care of children. And his father was in construction. So they moved throughout the country and she would just pack up the kids and he was pulling the trailer and she's got the kids, and she just, so my mother has always worked in some
Right.
capacity. And so she was never independently, she didn't have her finances, but she always had some kind of contribution financially. And so when I would do something like, I'm going to sell, Avon, my husband was like, no, you're not. You can't do that. And I'm like, yeah, I can, but to him, it was like, people will think I'm not a good provider financially if you have a job outside of our home. And how dare you, and it wasn't that he was mean or a misogynist or anything like that. It's just it's how he grew up. That's what he thought was normal. So you're saying that Joseph Smith is doing the same thing. It's like, well, my mom, did this. And so Emma, do this. It's just, and it was the culture and all of that kind of stuff that went into it too.
When I did my patriarchy chapter, I sent it to Amanda Komodo Hendricks.
Oh, I love her.
And she went through it with a fine-tooth comb, which was fabulous. And she pointed out something that I didn't realize, and that is, and kind of changed the nature of the chapter that I had, because I kind of felt like what we just talked about, that women were in the background, and they and so this was just the times, and this is the case. And yes, that's true, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, if we're telling a more full story.
Yeah.
So one of the things that she alerted me to was the idea that these revivals that were a part of Western New York, that particularly the Smiths were involved in, they actually targeted women. Women were the people that were most likely to convert and become really excited about the church. And so a lot of the moral kind of backbone was put on women. So right at this particular time in early 19th century America, women were creating societies, temperance societies, benevolent societies. They were taking the lead on making society better, building up families, leading in the communities. There were lots of those churches who employed women as exhorters, as preachers, and it was women and families who were joining the church and bringing their husbands along. So in the Smith family, however, so Lucy Mack's taking the lead. She converts to Presbyterianism, and she takes the older kids, because this is after Alvin dies, of course, Hiram and Sophronia and Samuel, and they go to the Presbyterian church. And this splits the family, because Joseph Smith Sr. is not going to go to church. He's not going to be, under the thumb of anybody else. Exactly. And Joseph Smith Jr. follows his dad, and this splits the family religiously. And there's a good case to be made that Joseph Smith Jr. is resentful at his mother for leading the family into religion and splitting the family. So some of the and you see that in the dynamic betwing Lehi and Sariah, right?
That's what I was just going to ask. Yeah, she was mumbling.
Yeah, she's mumbling, and so this idea that that Sariah is actually the unfaithful supporter of the husband's vision. This is a really important Smith family dynamic. So there are women who are leading in the community. They are striking out, but this causes division within the Smith home, and I think that what we see in the Book of Mormon, the dynamic and the almost suppression of women that we see in the Book of Mormon, is Joseph internalizing that conflict, and also suggesting that women need to be in their place in the background, not in the foreground, and so that then becomes part of what the church is. The women are in the background, they're not in the foreground. And that is the whole of the Book of Mormon. That's the whole of these early revelations. That's the way that the church rolls forward. Women are in the background. Capable women who are doing amazing things, yes, but certainly vetoed by their husbands and by the church hierarchy.
Oh,
So so these are so when we're talking, if we wanted to find an explanatory way of looking at the the church and how it deals with its gender balance, these go back to what is happening in the Smith home,
yes.
and how it gets laid out in the Book of Mormon, and how it progresses through the early church and through into Nauvoo. Even like we see, Lucy Mack and Emma are formidable women, and Joseph then finds that they are really striking out. Things like in 1842, and he and the wanting to do a benevolent society, and Joseph co-opts that. Actually, it's Emma who's running that, and Joseph kind of, it may be useful to Emma that Joseph is putting his stamp of approval on that, but he really co-opts that for his own ends. It gives Emma a job, and but it allows him to control the women because he can control them through his wife Emma, and particularly as polygamy, really becomes not even polygamy. It's all this kind of sexual, expression and ways in which people are exploring, but also the taking advantage, maybe even sexual abuses. He co-opts the Relief Society to fight on his behalf for his reputation when it's tarnished by his activities.
Oh my gosh. Ganesh.
So when you start to and look, these are short stories, so I'm not diving into big exposés in this one patriarchy chapter amongst 45 other chapters, right? So it's not, but if you start, that's the groundwork, and you can layer it up quite well and understand why it is that Joseph is doing this. And so I think and the other part there, the flip side of the patriarchy is that suppression. One side is the suppression of women, but it's also the flip side is the elevation of men. And this plays out in a really interesting way with Joseph, is that he loves men. Like, he loves to go on adventures with other men. He has tons of bromances throughout his life, right? Where he's just enamored with another man. They're enamored with him. They're like bosom buddies, doing lots of stuff together. And so it's not just that we have the suppression of women. We also have this odd thing, bromance thing that goes on for Joseph and the church, in the ways that these men support each other in this fraternal organization. I mean, effectively, the church is a fraternity that has women around it, right? Like it's the women are there. They're just it's a fraternity. It's a brotherhood. That's why he loved Masonry so much. But he'd already been engaging in those kinds of things, but when he saw Masonry, he was just enamored by it. And he built his own, effectively, fraternity.
Totally.
And he didn't give up Masonry. We think that he went to a Mason meeting and then thought, and then got revelation that this is how the temple endowment should be. But that's not the case. He did that, but he continued to go to the Masonry meetings the whole rest of his life. The Masonry fraternity was a huge part of Nauvoo society, Nauvoo men's society, right?
Wasn't it the largest charter in the state of Illinois?
Yes, because they just added people every single day. It was supposed to be that, you'd have a Mason meeting every week and you'd induct maybe 3 people. But when you're having Mason meetings every day, sometimes multiple times a day, you can induct, 10 people a day. So it quickly became the biggest Mason group in Illinois and probably the country, because just exponentially grew, because all of them, basically everybody wanted to be a Mason, right? So all of the men in Nauvoo, became Masons, and it certainly had its hierarchies and its eliteness and stuff like that. So it's
Oh my
it's a
gosh.
fraternity. So it's not even just that we participate in a patriarchy in the church.
Yeah.
It is a fraternity that has women around it. It's
Yeah.
not, so it's kind of a, and when you start to understand that that's what's going on, then
Yeah.
whole lots of things become a lot more clear. Yeah,
And
even
that
things like,
that
even
that
things
is
like,
a perfect another example of the light switch that goes on because of your research, because of this book. Because I always looked at it through the patriarchal lens, but I never looked at it through, like you say, the fraternity. And I did see comparisons, like, for example, my husband and I took a tour of Williamsburg when we were back in New York. So you see the Hasidic Jews and their own schools and their own buses that pick up their kids, and the women with 5 and 6 children. And then the men, they're not educated, but they meet regularly and they do their little, study of the scripture stuff, which is just like the school of the prophets. And it's such a perfect example of, it's not just patriarchy, it's more. And so I think when I get your book, that's going to be the first chapter that I read, unfortunately for my husband. But oh, Ganesh, this could obviously turn into a Mormon stories, and we could go on for 4 hours, because this is, I mean, how many light bulbs can you light up for me? It's just amazing. It's like, what? And you think, as you said, when you go through, when you start learning a little bit about church history, that's exactly what happened. And I know you personally were talking about your family, and, your wife's, what she did as far as her membership in the church was exactly what I did. I mean, I sometimes, and this is a lot just my personality, but I look at the people that are struggling with their deconstruction, and I was like, click, I'm out of here. No problem. Bye bye. See you later. And it was something as simple as a rock in the hat. And then it was, and I've mentioned this on other stories, it was reading of David O. McKay's biography and hearing how they covered up for Ezra Taft Benson. And I saw the boys club, exactly what you're talking about. I saw the fraternity, and I was like, oh, this is a man-made thing. And just like Tad Callister, unfortunately, he tries to point out that if it's not true, it's a man-made church. And I'm like, there you go. Anyway, thank you so much for taking time out of your day today. Seriously, we could go on for 75,000 hours, but I just appreciate, and I'm so excited to get your book. And is it ever going to come out on audio?
I'm working on that, but it might be a little while away. So
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, because I started my journey with learning historical truths by hiking and walking and listening to audiobooks. And people probably thought I was crazy because I'd be walking along and all of a sudden I'd go, what? Out loud. But anyway, so well, I am looking forward to it. Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, it's been such a treat to be with you, and we'll look forward to doing more in the future. I'll be interested in your once you've looked at a few chapters and started to think about them. You'll have other things that you'll want to ask, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
And I think that's what we'll have to do. We'll have to get together and take it one chapter at a time, which means there will be 45 podcasts with Ganesh. So I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that too, actually.
Yeah.
I'm a decent researcher and okay writer, but actually the talking about it, that's the thing that I really like, because I really enjoy the dynamics, the kinds of things that you brought up today, and how it plays into what I've researched and kind of what we are able to do and synergize together to understand what's going on. I think I like that a lot. That's my jam. That's what fills my soul. So I'm
It's
happy
so
to
true. It's
come
so
and do more of
true.
that.
And that's what and it's, as you mentioned, that's the great thing about podcasts and the social media, is the connection and the one-on-one, and it's just nice to talk to people it's better to talk to people in real life. But the beautiful thing about social media is it's brought the world into our home. So I love that as well. Well, thank you, and go about your day. Enjoy your time in America. And I'm anxious to, again, we'll schedule another podcast and we'll start from chapter 1 and we'll go from there.
Fabulous. Okay.
All right.
Well, we'll look
Talk
forward
to
to
you
it.
later. Okay.
Right.
Bye-bye. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I want to bring this up again. Joseph Smith, The Architect of Mormonism, a topical biography by Ganesh Cherian. And it is available on Amazon. And you can also get it on Kindle. So, and I think that's beautiful. But I wanted to say what I'm going to offer my listeners is if you subscribe and like this podcast, I am giving away one of Ganesh's books. And right now it is only available in hardback. It's a little spendy, but it's worth it. And it'll be a reference tool that you will use for the rest of your life. But I'm going to give you a book for free. So what you need to do is comment. You need to say book, and then I will contact you directly, and I will put all the names into a hat, and it will not have a rock in it. But I will pull out a name, and someone that comments will get a free book. So, and I think this is going to be, maybe I should get Ganesh back on. Will this be the Mormon doctrine book of the 21st century, where people use it as a reference? It's not just a read. I'm going to bring Ganesh back on for just a second. What do you think? Is it going to be the Mormon doctrine of this century?
Well, I hope it will be a bit of a reference. And in fact, like it is a big book with a lot of stuff in it. And I won't have everything right either. Part of it, I put my email address in there. I hope that people would critique it, that they would add to it, that they would find new things. And people have, and sent me some stuff which has been really cool to go. Actually, I didn't even know that happened, and it fits right in the timeline of some of these ideas that we're talking about, and explains them so well. So I'm very excited that it's not just a thing that gets done and then doesn't have a chance to be something better in the future. Actually, this is supposed to be slightly collaborative. It's supposed to go onwards. And and look, I think that your offer is amazing. I'll take care of that, Renee. So whoever wins your thing, you let me know their address, and I will get a book sent to them anywhere in the world, wherever
Oh
they
my
are.
gosh, that's so
Like
fabulous.
if it's in the United States, that's fine. If it's in Britain, that's fine too, right? Or if it's in Morocco, we'll get it there, because I will take care of that for you.
You'll deliver it by camel. No. Very good. All right. Thanks for coming back on. Bye-bye. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. What a wonderful opportunity. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have found this Mormon Monday podcast informative and enlightening. And I love that Ganesh really, as we close the podcast, he brought it back to our theme of she became visible, because the church has hidden Lucy. Brigham Young did everything he could. The church has hidden Emma and only brought her back out when it was necessary because of information that got out. And so I love the podcast I listened to the other day where someone talked about how they changed the narrative to where Emma for a while was portrayed as this evil woman that left the church and wasn't strong and didn't have a testimony to, oh no, it was such a great love story. And so they had to change the narrative to make it work. But anyway, so thank you again. And again, in the comments, you need to put book, and then I will contact you, get your email, send it to Ganesh, and he is going to send you a book anywhere in the world. I love that. You know what that means? That means you need to share this. You need to share this with everyone so that it gets out to everyone in the world, because it's going to be the read of the century. I really do think it's going to take over, and it's going to become the topic of, I don't know, Ganesh, we'll see if you get referenced at conference in October. It'll be some kind of a metaphor of some kind, like some people, like Tad Callister, some people say, and we'll all know who he's talking about. So anyway, thanks for joining me today on She Became Visible. Remember, like, subscribe, especially now, because there's a reward at the end. And we will see you on Wednesday, which is Wisdom Wednesday. I will be interviewing another guest. So thanks for joining me today. See you later. Bye-bye.